She cut him off, stole his spot, and smirked. Just another man she could push around. But when he stepped out, towering over her, and took one slow step forward, her confidence shattered. Because she had just made a huge mistake. It was a typical bustling Saturday at the local shopping mall. The parking lot was a maze of cars moving in and out, with drivers vying for the best spots as they prepared for their weekend shopping. Among them was Karen, a privileged white woman, who drove her sleek sedan with a sense of entitlement that seemed to stretch beyond the confines of her vehicle. Karen's eyes were sharply set on securing a prime parking spot, close to the mall entrance. Her car glided past families and shopping carts, her impatience growing as each potential spot was taken just before she could turn in. Then she spotted it. A car pulling out of a spot on the aisle closest to the mall doors. It was the kind of spot that shoppers circling the lot could only dream of. At the same moment, a black man in a rugged pickup truck had also noticed the opening. He signaled his intention to park, his indicator blinking calmly as he began to maneuver his truck into position. However, Karen, seeing an opportunity, sped up rather than slow down. With a swift move, she cut off the truck, pulling into the spot with a victorious swiftness that left little room for dispute. The man honked once, a clear but polite indication of his displeasure, and rolled down his window. "Ma'am, I was backing into that spot," he called out, his voice firm but controlled, trying to reason with her. Karen stepped out of her car, clutching her purse and smoothing down her designer jacket. She turned to face the man, a smirk playing on her lips as she replied, "First come, first serve. Too bad." Her tone was dismissive, her stance one of unwarranted victory. The parking lot, usually just a background of coming and going, suddenly became a stage. Shoppers paused, their attention drawn by the confrontation. Some shook their heads, others watched, intrigued by the unfolding drama. Karen, feeling the eyes on her, decided to add fuel to the fire. She gave the man a mocking look, her voice louder as she said, "You people need to learn your place." The words hung in the air, heavy and offensive, a stark display of her blatant disregard and entitlement. Silence fell over the onlookers. The air, previously filled with the everyday sounds of a busy mall, now seemed thick, charged with tension and disbelief at her audacity. Unfazed by her condescension, the black man stepped out of his truck. He was tall, muscular, and exuded an aura of quiet strength. His demeanor was the polar opposite of Karen's. Where she was agitated and arrogant, he was composed and serene. As he stood there, looking at Karen, her smirk briefly faltered. There was something about his calmness, his lack of visible anger, that unnerved her. Despite her outward display of confidence, a flicker of doubt crossed her face. Karen, locked in her narrow view of the world, had no idea who she just disrespected. She was oblivious to the fact that her assumptions based on race and her aggressive claim to the parking spot might have just set the stage for a significant lesson in humility. This incident, seemingly mundane in the grand scheme of things, was poised to unravel in a way Karen could never have anticipated. Her actions, driven by privilege and prejudice, were about to come back to haunt her, teaching her a lesson that the prime parking spot was the least of her concerns on this fateful day. In the bustling mall parking lot, the confrontation between Karen and the black man escalated rapidly as Karen, with her arms crossed defiantly, smirked at the growing crowd. "Go park somewhere else. This is my spot now," she declared, her voice dripping with entitlement. The casual dismissiveness of her tone only added fuel to the fiery scene unfolding. The black man, however, maintained an impressive calm, his posture relaxed yet assertive. He scanned Karen briefly, his expression unreadable to the onlookers, some of whom had begun to record the interaction on their phones. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a mix of disbelief and disapproval at Karen's blatant disregard. Noticing the cameras, Karen swiftly shifted her tactics. She put on a face of feigned fear and addressed the man with a quivering voice. "Oh, you're intimidating me now?" Her words were strategic, aimed at painting herself as a victim in a scenario she had instigated. The man sighed deeply, a gesture of frustration more than fatigue, and rubbed his temple as if trying to ward off a headache. "Ma'am, I'm just asking you to be fair," he replied, his tone even but firm. the reasonableness of his request stark against Karen's growing hostility. Karen scoffed loudly, rolling her eyes in a dramatic display of disdain. "Life isn't fair. Deal with it," she retorted, her words slicing through the thickening tension. Her dismissive attitude only served to alienate the onlookers further, many of whom whispered among themselves, visibly uncomfortable with her aggressive demeanor. Undeterred by the disapproval around her, Karen continued her tirade, her voice rising to ensure she was heard. "What do you even need a spot like this for? You're not some VIP," she sneered, her words laden with condescension and unwarranted superiority. Her assumption that she could belittle the man without consequence was palpable, and the tension in the air was almost tangible. Onlookers exchanged looks of discomfort and disapproval, their whispers growing louder as they discussed Karen's behavior. It was clear to everyone present that her attitude was not only offensive but also deeply unjust. However, Karen, caught up in her display of entitlement, failed to notice the subtle shift in the crowd's perception. As she ranted, the man simply listened, his expression changing subtly from resignation to a quiet resolve. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. A small, knowing smile that seemed to hint at something Karen could not fathom. The crowd, sensing a change in the dynamic, quieted down, their attention now fixed on the man. Karen, misinterpreting his smile as acquiescence, smirked triumphantly, thinking she had won the verbal battle. But her triumph was short-lived. The man's smile widened slightly, and he reached into his coat pocket, pulling out something that caught the light. It was a badge, an official badge that marked him as not just any civilian but a person of significant authority. The badge was from the federal government, indicating a high-ranking official whose presence in such a mundane setting as a mall parking lot was anything but ordinary. The revelation hit Karen like a physical blow, her face draining of color as she processed the implications. The crowd gasped collectively, many taking a step back as they realized the gravity of whom Karen had just attempted to belittle. Her words, so cutting and dismissive moments ago, now hung in the air like a bad odor, embarrassing and inappropriate. The man held up his badge for the crowd to see, his voice calm but authoritative as he finally spoke, cutting through the stunned silence. "I am here on official business, and this parking spot was reserved for my use. Your behavior today, ma'am, has been not only unfair but also discriminatory." Karen, now fully realizing the enormity of her mistake, stammered an apology, her earlier bravado crumbling in the face of her grave misjudgment. The man nodded, accepting her apology with a graciousness that seemed at odds with the harshness of their earlier interaction. As the man walked back to his vehicle, the crowd parted for him, their expressions a mix of respect and shock. Karen, left standing alone, faced the murmurs and disapproving shakes of the head from the onlookers. Her attempt to dominate the parking lot had backfired spectacularly, serving as a harsh lesson in humility and respect. The incident quickly became a local sensation, discussed not just for the drama of the confrontation, but also for the profound lesson it imparted about prejudice, power, and the unexpected ways in which justice can manifest. Karen's encounter with the man in the parking lot was more than just a dispute over a space. It was a pivotal moment of reckoning that challenged her perceptions and changed her understanding of power and privilege. In the crowded mall parking lot, the tension escalated as Karen found herself increasingly isolated. Her smirk had initially been one of defiance, a mask of superiority she wore comfortably. Yet, as the whispers of bystanders grew louder, something within the atmosphere shifted palpably. She glanced around, her eyes catching the curious and disapproving looks aimed not at her, but toward the man she had so rudely dismissed. Karen's unease mounted as she noticed the man's serene demeanor. It wasn't the reaction of someone who felt defeated. Rather, it was the calm of someone secure in their position, unthreatened by her aggression. This realization began to gnaw at her confidence, the seeds of doubt sprouting rapidly. At that moment, a security officer, drawn by the growing crowd and the murmur of conflict, approached with a concerned look. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, scanning the faces of Karen and the man. Before Karen could muster a response, a sudden recognition sparked among the spectators. One bystander, A woman with a sharp intake of breath exclaimed with a mixture of reverence and shock, "Oh my God, that's—" Her words trailed off, but the implication hung heavily in the air. Karen stiffened, her previous arrogance evaporating as she observed the crowd's reaction. The security guard, noting the bystanders' reaction, immediately straightened his posture, his attitude shifting to one of respect and alertness. The change in his demeanor was a clear indicator of the gravity of the situation. Karen's heart raced as panic set in. Wait, what's going on?" she stammered, her voice betraying her growing fear. For the first time since the confrontation began, she appeared genuinely nervous, her facade of control crumbling visibly. The man, who had maintained his silence through her tirades, finally spoke. His voice was low and even, each word deliberate and imbued with an authority that Karen had not anticipated. "You sure you don't want to move your car?" he asked, his question rhetorical yet pointed. The simplicity of his query, in contrast to the charged atmosphere, made Karen pause. She stared at him, suddenly aware of the full extent of her misjudgment. The parking lot, once filled with the typical sounds of a busy mall, was now dead silent, the crowd holding its breath as the drama reached its peak. In that moment of quiet, the weight of her error settled on Karen's shoulders. She realized that she had grossly disrespected someone of significance, someone whose identity carried weight and respect, far beyond the ordinary patrons of the mall. The bystanders' silent stares and the security officer's deference painted a picture clearer than any words could. But it was too late. The damage was done. Her attempt to assert dominance had backfired spectacularly, exposing not only her prejudice but also her ignorance. The realization that she had made a grave error in judgment was now inescapable. The man's question about moving her car, once a simple request, now felt like a final chance at redemption, a chance she had squandered with her initial dismissal. The aftermath of her actions was about to unfold, and Karen could do little but brace herself for the consequences. Her attempt to belittle someone had instead diminished her, a stark reversal of fortune that left her reeling. The crowd's silent judgment was a palpable reminder that actions born of arrogance and prejudice could lead to profound personal downfall. In the crowded mall parking lot, the tension reached a fever pitch as Karen, faced with the unraveling of her public persona, attempted to salvage the situation with a nervous chuckle. "Oh, it was just a joke!" she exclaimed, her laugh forced and lacking any real humor. Her eyes darted around, seeking an ally in the sea of faces that now judged her every move. The security officer, his expression unamused, responded firmly, "Ma'am, I'd move your car if I were you." His advice, though politely phrased, carried an undertone of finality. It was a clear directive rather than a suggestion, signaling that the incident had escalated beyond a simple parking dispute. Karen, her pride wounded and defiance peaking, crossed her arms and stood her ground. "Why should I? Who even is this guy?" she demanded, her voice a mix of irritation and desperation. She scanned the crowd, looking for any sign of support, but found none. Her stance, once aggressive and commanding, now appeared petulant and misguided. The crowd, which had been murmuring and whispering throughout the confrontation, suddenly quieted as someone stepped forward. The person, a middle-aged woman who had been watching the events unfold, spoke up with a clear voice that carried across the parking lot. "That's Dr. Martin Luther King III," she announced, her tone imbued with a mix of respect and incredulity. Karen's face drained of color at the revelation. Dr. King, an esteemed civil rights activist and a prominent public figure, was not someone whose presence could be taken lightly. His contributions to social justice and his public stature made him a respected figure nationwide. As the reality of whom she had just antagonized sank in, Karen's earlier bravado evaporated completely. The man, who had maintained a calm and composed demeanor throughout the altercation, now allowed a small smirk to cross his face. "Still feel like keeping the spot?" he asked, his voice low but clear, cutting through the chilly air with precision. Karen, her usual assertiveness crumbling under the weight of her error, stammered a response, her words tripping over each other as she tried to form a coherent apology. But before she could articulate her regret, the security officer intervened with a final warning, his patience clearly worn thin. With no options left and her dignity hanging by a thread, Karen scrambled to her car, the eyes of the entire crowd following her every move. Her retreat was hasty and ungraceful, a stark contrast to the confident manner in which she had arrived. She quickly moved her car to a less desirable spot, far from the coveted space near the mall entrance. As she walked back past the crowd, her head down and her steps quick, the murmurs resumed. The spectators, having witnessed the entire spectacle, now had a story that would undoubtedly spread far beyond the confines of the parking lot. Karen, once so sure of her untouchable status, had been publicly humbled in a manner she could never have anticipated. The incident, while seemingly trivial at the outset, had morphed into a profound lesson on humility, respect, and the recognition of others' dignity. Karen had not only lost a prime parking spot, but had also lost a significant amount of her self-respect and public dignity. The crowd's gaze, once curious and now pitiful, followed her until she disappeared from view, a poignant end to a public debacle. Dr. King, once the target of Karen's misplaced disdain, now stood as a figure of quiet strength and dignity. His handling of the situation, marked by patience and an unshakable calm, only served to elevate his standing in the eyes of the onlookers. Karen's misjudgment had, inadvertently, showcased the very virtues that made Dr. King a respected leader and a revered figure in the fight for equality. Karen sat in her car, the heat of embarrassment flushing her face a deep red as she tried to compose herself. Her hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel, and her breath came in short, uneven gasps. The weight of her public humiliation pressed down on her, suffocating in its intensity. As she started the engine, she kept her eyes fixed forward, determined not to meet the gaze of any bystanders who continued to watch her with a mix of amusement and disapproval. As Karen drove away from the parking lot, the sounds of laughter and murmuring conversations filled the air behind her. People shook their heads, incredulous at her audacity and the dramatic unfolding of events. The crowd dispersed slowly, the excitement of the confrontation giving way to animated discussions about what had just transpired. Unbeknownst to Karen, one of the onlookers had captured the entire incident on their smartphone. The video, from her aggressive maneuver to steal the parking spot to the moment she realized whom she had challenged, was crystal clear. By the time Karen reached the main road, the video was already being uploaded to social media, with the caption, "Karen picks a fight with the wrong guy." The video spread like wildfire, propelled by the universal disdain for entitled behavior and the public's thirst for instant viral content. By the end of the night, it had been shared thousands of times across platforms, from Twitter to Facebook to Instagram. Each share multiplied the viewership, drawing comments, likes, and an endless stream of memes. Karen, oblivious to her burgeoning infamy, arrived home still reeling from her encounter, unaware that her reputation was unraveling in the digital world. The next morning, Karen's phone was inundated with notifications. Confused, she scrolled through message after message, each one a variation of shock or mockery. It didn't take long for her to find the source, her confrontation in the mall parking lot, now immortalized online under the hashtag #SawOnParkingLotKaren. The video clips, GIFs, and memes portrayed her as the woman who picked the wrong one, a label that seemed destined to stick. The meme culture took on a life of its own. Images of Karen's shocked face as she recognized Dr. Martin Luther King III were juxtaposed with captions that satirized her ignorance and entitlement. Each meme was more creative and biting than the last, spreading across social media platforms and even catching the attention of online news outlets. Amid the viral storm, Karen's sense of self was shattered. Her name, once just her own, had become a byword for racial insensitivity and entitlement. The backlash was swift and merciless, affecting not just her online presence, but her personal and professional life as well. People she knew distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the negative publicity. Karen was forced to confront the harsh reality of her actions, the consequences of which extended far beyond a moment of poor judgment in a parking lot. The digital footprint of her mistake was indelible, serving as a stark reminder of the power of social media and the enduring impact of public actions on personal reputation. As the meme phenomenon grew, Karen had no choice but to reflect on the incident, the public persona she had cultivated, and the values she truly wanted to embody. The lesson was a hard one, learned under the unforgiving spotlight of viral internet culture. She realized too late that in the age of smartphones and social media, moments of disrespect and prejudice were not only shameful, but potentially life-altering. The aftermath of the parking lot incident became a topic of wide discussion, captivating audiences far beyond the local community. Amidst this viral sensation, a journalist sought out the black man at the center of the controversy, Dr. Martin Luther King III, whose composed demeanor throughout the ordeal had fascinated the public. Sitting across from him, the journalist posed the question that many had been pondering. How did you stay so calm? Dr. King, with a knowing smirk, leaned back slightly. His response was simple, yet profound. Because I already knew how this would end, he said, his voice steady and confident. This simple statement encapsulated not just his response to that particular incident, but also his approach to life and conflicts. Having faced various forms of discrimination throughout his life and career, Dr. King had learned that patience and a cool head often led to just resolutions, especially when underestimating adversaries realize their mistakes too late. Meanwhile, Karen, the woman whose impulsive decision had sparked the entire episode, found herself overwhelmed by the consequences of her actions. As the video of her confrontation continued to spread like wildfire, she saw no other option but to deactivate all her social media accounts. However, the internet, with its long memory and relentless momentum, was not so easily escaped. The video of her claiming a parking spot that was not hers, her dismissive comments, and her confrontation with Dr. King remained in perpetual circulation, shared across platforms and watched by millions. The video became a case study in social justice discussions, used in workshops and seminars as an example of everyday racism and entitlement. Karen's face and words were analyzed and critiqued, serving as a stark reminder of the pervasive issues still present in society. For Karen, a moment's decision turned into a lifetime of repercussions. She became a reluctant symbol of what not to do, of how deeply ingrained prejudices could lead to public downfall. This story, while centered on a seemingly mundane dispute over a parking space, unraveled to reveal much deeper societal dynamics. It highlighted the power of social media as a tool for societal reflection and change, demonstrating how quickly public opinion can be mobilized for accountability. Dr. King, in his subsequent public appearances and speeches, referred to the incident as a teachable moment, not just for Karen but for society at large. He emphasized the importance of understanding and respecting diversity, of recognizing that actions born out of prejudice can have unforeseen and widespread effects. His calmness in the face of injustice, captured in the viral video, served as a powerful example of dignified resistance and the strength of character. As for Karen, the experience was a harsh lesson in humility and the consequences of one's actions. She had to learn to navigate a world where her name had become synonymous with racial insensitivity and entitlement. The journey was painful and filled with regret, but it also opened her eyes to the realities and struggles that she had previously ignored or minimized. The perfect karma, the perfect ending. A moment of disrespect had transformed into a lifetime lesson, reminding everyone that actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences unfold in the most public and irreversible ways.